Philip,
Hello.
it is good to see you again.
Good to be here.
And not just today, we're going to cover another Christmas story like we did last year, which I definitely recommend that if anybody hasn't seen it yet, you should totally go see 1800 Christmas with Philip. Also, since I happen to have the mug right in front of me, I'm getting coffee all over myself like I do all the time. Uh, if you're looking for a unique Christmas gift, feel free to go to Designs by Sparrow. She made me this mug for my birthday this year. She makes great pottery and pottery goods. Um, so, Philip, we're going to talk about the Wild West and Wild West Christmas related stories today.
That's right. Yes. Yeah, I think when we think of the Wild West, we don't usually think of holidays. We think of
Yeah.
stuff that movies show us, but
Yeah, which is a lot of like we covered in the last video. Old guys, one last score, everybody's miserable, everybody's dirty, people get murdered all the time.
and the cowboys are never actually cowboys. They're actually more like bounty hunters or sheriffs, but cowboys cowboys herd cattle. That's all they do. But for some reason they don't actually show cowboys in movies. Yeah, a lot of my specific kind of historical background with the West, goes back to you were talking about the gold rush earlier. Talks about the gold rush, focuses on that period in California, but also in Nevada, Arizona, these places that figured highly in the American imagination of what the rough old West was back in the day.
So
How did
what
Yeah, I
so
was
very briefly, what made the gold rush so amazing, like so big? Why was it such a big deal that so many people are now gonna go across this country and try to find gold?
well, it was, imagine you are a farmer or a tradesman and you live in a small town or in the middle of nowhere. You could also be living in a big city. You could be, working in a factory or, just doing some kind of menial job. And then you read in the newspaper that in California, on the other side of the continent, people are walking around and picking up nuggets of solid, pure gold off the ground. It sounds like nothing you've ever heard before. It doesn't sound real, but people assure you it is real and it's happening right now. And all you have to do is come out here and you can literally pick the money off the ground and it's all yours to keep, brother. And you go home and what a change that would make in your life. What you probably haven't even seen gold in your life. You haven't seen a physical piece of, a nugget of gold. And maybe if you live in a city, you walk by these big, you know, mansions of the Astors and people with Italian architecture, and you think one day that could be me. Well, this is the dream, and it could be yours. It was the first real change in what the American dream was. It was a cultural change. Back before that, it was if you come to America, you can create your own homestead, you can farm, and as long as you put in a little bit of hard work or a lot of hard work, then you can have your own piece of the pie. You don't need to be anyone else's employee. You can just make your own life. Now it changed. It changed to if you just put in some hard work and extreme adversity and come out to California, you could set yourself up and your family for life. And what followed was the greatest mass migration of human beings up until that point in history. Up until that point in history, it had never been seen before because this wasn't just Americans coming out to California. It was people from Hawaii and China and Peru and Chile and Sweden and Canada and Germany. There were people from all over the world who did everything they could to get on a boat or get on a wagon train and come out to California. And California swelled from San Francisco was a population of maybe 100, a couple hundred people, but it swelled to over 100,000 in two years, which is outrageous. It's mind-boggling. You didn't see cities grow that fast. And if you could, yeah, that was why it was such a big deal, because it was one of the first times when people said, "Oh, really? All I have to do is go there, and I can become rich, just like like all the other rich people I read about." In a time when everybody was a farmer and most people were very poor and could barely feed themselves, that's very tempting.
Yeah. So it's like how basically every week people try to play to win the lottery.
Yes, except this would have been even better, because this wasn't. There was a sense that you could control your destiny, because with the lottery, it's luck. It's you got to hope. It's with gambling too. There were mostly games of luck back then. They didn't really play poker in the West. If you were gambling back then, it was literally, does the dice come out six or seven? It was, did I select the right card? It was all games of chance. And this was different. This was, I can work harder. What if I just worked harder than the guy next to me? Then I could make more money. Well, what if I just had better equipment? Well, what if I just did this? What if me and a whole bunch of my friends got together and we started our own little mining company, and we could set up our own little village, and then we can. So you had these people coming there with these aspirations, people coming there with this this attitude, this work ethic. And not everybody was able to make the journey, because even just to get there, most people went by ship, and the ship had to go famously through. Uh, you either had to go down around the tip of South America and all the way back up to San Francisco, or you had to go through Panama, or parts of Central America, and that involved disembarking, and then you had to go upriver, and then you had to sleep overnight in a shack, and then you had to go more river, and then you got to wait for another boat to come by to pick you up, because boats couldn't go through there until the Panama Canal had been made in the early 1900s. So just to get there took 4 or 5, 6 months, and that's just travel time. That's all, and all that time you're feverish, you're thinking, if I can, all right, half a year of my life, sure, if I can just get there, then I can step off, and then the work really begins. uh, it was unlike anything that people had ever seen before. And what it created too, it created a unique society that was mostly men. It was almost entirely men that went to California to find gold. uh, and you have this society. I read a phrase. It was called it was a Garden of Eden with many Adams and very few Eves. It was a sausage party, or sausage fest, for sure. And that changed the character of how society was there. These images of life in these boom towns, these mining towns, and even in larger towns like San Francisco, where life is pretty rough. Because when you think about getting 100,000 19th century men from all over the world who are there motivated purely by profit and making a life for themselves and trying to strike it rich, you can get some nasty personalities, and you can get uh, really rough. You can get a rough culture out of that, especially because there was no for a little while there was no law. Like, there was no actual. California had not been a state yet. California was only made a state in 1851. Um, but the Compromise of 1850 said that California would enter the United States as a free state, so that it was part of the Compromise of 1850, where they were trying to balance Congress with free states and slave states, so that both sides could feel like they had an equal say, and they weren't being outvoted by another faction. And so California only entered as 1851, but we had California. The gold rush started in 1848. So we had this period of time when California was a military jurisdiction that it was military governorship, but it was very sparsely populated, sparsely governed, so you couldn't get to everybody. So in a way, people had to make their own laws. And you read accounts like this where things were dealt with pretty harshly, and it was it was because people, were making their own laws, and it wasn't uncommon for thieves to just be, a quick trial that afternoon, and then before nightfall, they're already up, being strung up on the gallows to die in front of everybody. And they said, that's just the way it went. It was rough.
Yeah, yeah. So some of those movies definitely portray real reality.
They do, and I've seen, movies, shows like Deadwood, especially. They show that kind of that roughness, and that trying to create a new town out of nothing with the types of people that would go there. And they would exaggerate certain things for the show, but a lot of the stuff on that show really, really did happen.
Okay. And there might be other movies as an example. What comes to mind is True Grit, the remake of it.
Right? Which, yeah, the great film, great film. And what you see is, the same thing with Deadwood. Deadwood's also just a brilliant show. What you see is that on that show, as you saw in reality back then, is, you had, it was rough and it was dirty, and people, uh there were dark things that happened, but it was also, these are people who come from society, and they wanted to create a place that they wanted to live in. And the same that you see in a show like Deadwood, where there's tough people, and there's gunslingers, and there's people, beating each other to death over certain things or getting executed. There was also people trying to create beauty, and there were people who had, they wanted to start their own magazine, they wanted to start their own newspaper. uh, Reports of saloons, saloons were plastered with Currier and Ives prints, and stuff, just stuff cut out from magazines, just anything to pretty up the place. Calico, they patterned, very cheap patterned cotton print. They would use to line things, and upholster things, and put it up there, just to give people a sense of beauty. And people brought musical instruments with them. They would play music with each other. They hosted dances, and a lot of the times, the guys had no choice but to dance with each other, and that was fun.
Yeah.
There were just
Sausage Fest.
Yeah, there were not many women.
Yeah. The Wild Western Sausage Fest. That sounds like a that sounds like some weird play off of Wild Buffalo Bill show there.
Right, yeah, Congress of Rough Riders of the World. Yeah, yeah, but at the same time, that situation made it a very good proposition for women. If you were one of the few women who wanted to make the journey, you could make a ton of money as a prostitute, or running a cat house, or even, if you can't find a husband, if you're having, if you don't have many options out where you are, you go to California, and there are tales of guys lining up at the docks, and when women would come off the ships, they immediately were propositioned for marriage, because these were lonely. They wanted a wife. And they were like, listen, I got this much land, I got a claim, I got my own shop, I can set, I could provide a good life for you, ma'am. Here's my information, call on me. you know. So, women had their pick of whatever they wanted, really, because they had what men wanted.
But talking about change, so obviously we've got a lot of great media out there. I think there might have even been when you were talking about Deadwood. It was, I think the show was called Godless or Lawless, and it was a similar idea. It was a mini series, like a basically seven movies, um, or seven part, like 20-hour movie or something like that. All these pieces about people doing like their worst. But today, we get to talk about not just something that is the opposite of it, we
Yeah,
also get to talk about something in relation to the time of the year.
that is right. That's right. Uh, yes, because people there didn't come out of the ground. People there came from the Eastern Seaboard. They came from the Central America, Europe, and they all brought their traditions. They brought their cultural traditions with them, and among those that they brought, of course, was Christmas.
Yeah. And for people who don't know or have not seen it, we covered last year, Philip and I, we did a Christmas special that covered um, that Christmas as we know it really kicked off in the 1800s. Um, Part was the Industrial Revolution, and another thing was we made it. We Americans made it so big and awesome because there are all these immigrants now living in this country, and there's a push to give something that people would have in common.
That's right. That's right. And it was something that there were different ways to celebrate it, and it kind of depended on where you were. And so, if you were celebrating in town, if you were celebrating in your normal life around family, there was one way to do it. And if you're out in the middle of nowhere, if you're out in the boondocks, if you're out in the mining claims of California, or later on when there was the Nevada silver rush, you were separated from your family by thousands and thousands of miles. You could not, you couldn't even be sure to have gotten a letter to them by the time Christmas rolled around. So you had to make do. You had to make do with what you had and with who you had around. And we have these stories of people making the best of their situation. People who are determined, even though they're alone, out in the middle of nowhere, living in a tent for months on end, living rough, and they still wanted to celebrate Christmas because they needed something to look forward to. Even if it was even if it, well, there were two main ways of looking at it. One was, wow, Christmas is coming up. How depressing. How depressing. Oh my God, I miss my family so much. And that would make a lot of people really, really sad, because when that day comes along, that is a day, all of your family back east, they're all with each other. They're exchanging gifts. They're having a wonderful roast. People are coming in from out of town and they're singing songs with each other. And it's a great old time. And boy, I wish I was there right now, but I can't. Instead, here I am in this gorge looking at, with the river rushing below me, and the, eagles up in the trees and bears in the woods, and it's freezing cold, and it's raining, because California does get cold. It's the sun. It's the golden state. It's very full of sunshine, but it gets very cold and rainy, especially up in the Sierra Nevadas, which is where a lot of these miners were. And I can say that because I grew up there, and even though it doesn't snow, it gets cold as heck. So you had different people. So that was one way of looking at it. Wow, this is really depressing. Maybe I can forget my worries by just diving into work and treating it like just another day. And I actually have a letter actually to narrate from 1851, Christmas Day, 1851, that has this little slice of life in it, and has a little bit of this same sentiment. Uh, this man's name was Andrew, and he wrote to his brother in Indiana. So this is, dear brother. He quotes, "Christmas gift to you. I wish I could be at home today. I think we would have a Christmas party. We would have the old gobbler roasted with a score of fat hens, pound cakes, pies, and lots of other good things. But the best of all would be the pleasure of seeing you all. Probably if we live, we may be with you next Christmas. I will tell you what kind of a day it has been and what we have been doing. It has been the most rainy day I believe I have ever seen in this country. As we have had no invitations to any Christmas parties and feeling no inclination to go on a bust, we thought we might spend the day as profitably by going down to our diggings and working. As we had no invitations to any Christmas parties and feeling no inclination to go on a bust, we thought we might spend the day as profitably by going down to our diggings and working like fine fellows, even if it was Christmas and awful rainy at that. So Aaron and I encased ourselves in our waterproof suits and went to work. We made $11.25 each, which was a tolerably good rainy day's work." So there's a couple things you can get from this letter. One is these guys these guys wanted to put Christmas out of their heads by just going to work, pretending like it was any other day. Two, we had no invitations to any Christmas parties. This means people were inviting each other to Christmas parties. They were having their own parties, their own spontaneous, hey, y'all, come gather around and let's just, our families aren't here, but we could be family for each other and we can spend Christmas together. So that's pretty depressing, but they weren't invited. I would have invited them. Because that, I think, that kind of passes into this other point that I wanted to make, is that people, even though they were not surrounded by family, they made essentially their own short parties, their own families, their own short-term families, so that because that's what you get when you have a small community of people that you're all in the same situation. I mean, it wasn't really much to be the richest guy in town, because you're still living in the dirt like everybody else. So essentially, everybody's on a fairly level playing field in some of these places, and that would have engendered a lot of community and a sense of, even though we're all kind of competing a little bit, we're all here to find gold, and I don't want you to find my gold, and if I have the chance to, if I find a nugget on 2 inches past your claim, on your property, I probably wouldn't mind
Swiping it.
fudging the rules a little bit and swiping it. But we're all human beings, and we can't be gruff, grizzled, grim, mean-hearted, greedy men all the time. We also have to cut loose and have some fun, because we're human beings. Even the toughest guy, has a family. And so that's what they would do. And they would get together, different mining camps, and some people might come in from down from the hills. If they had known about it, they knew the people at the camp, and they would have celebrated. They would have. There's not much talk of gift giving. People didn't really, they didn't give each other Christmas presents, but it was more about celebrating. And how do you celebrate? You eat and drink and you dance. And that is what we have. That's what we have commonly attested for celebrating Christmas at this time and place. It's about getting drunk, it's about eating a lot of food, and it's about partying.
All right. That is, so, yeah, speaks
Which
for
it still
itself.
is. It still is to an extent these days. Um,
Some
it,
traditions just don't die.
they just don't die. Well, I think, but that's the main thing about it, because that's the letting loose, getting something and giving gifts and stuff. That is a relatively recent invention of Christmas, as we talked about. But feasting and drinking and revelry and singing songs and dancing together, that goes back centuries and centuries. That goes back, you find those attestations in Roman times for Saturnalia. Uh, that's the historical core of Christmas that has endured, no matter what culture, no matter what season, no matter what year or century or religion. That time of year, that festival, that moment, really is just about getting drunk and eating a lot of food and hanging out with people you love.
Agreed. Agreed.
What else?
Do we have
I got a couple other anecdotes as well.
yeah, do we have some other stories or
I have some. It's called it's the tale of the Christmas nugget. Uh,
okay, the Christmas nugget.
this is from a man's memoir of his own time. He wrote this in 1893. He was talking about his days when he was young, back in 1849, beginning of the gold rush. Christmas Day, 1849, there was a woman who delivered a giant 12-pound baby boy. So this kid was born on Christmas. And
It
Uh,
was 12 pounds?
12 pounds in 1849.
1849? What the did she eat?
What was she eating? She's been very healthy. Uh, but what happened? What happened was people joked, "Oh, someone struck it. Her husband struck it rich and found a 12-pound nugget." And like, ha ha ha. But all the miners in the word spread like wildfire, and everyone went, "Oh, it's a Christmas miracle. A guy found a 12-pound nugget of gold. I have to see this with my own eyes." And so all these miners streamed down from the hills, and they came down one after another demanding to see the 12-pound nugget of gold. And of course, when they were presented, oh yeah, this is the nugget, my son. Uh, and everyone uh, everyone actually loved it. By all accounts, actually, they all thought it was fun to, they got. It was a little bit of, it sounded like a trick, but they all left saying, this is, all right, actually, you know what? Congratulations. This is wonderful. What a blessing. And each of the miners loved being had, Bennett recalled. As each squad came out of the cabin, the men solemnly asserted that the Wilson Nugget was the finest ever seen, which is so sweet. What a sweet picture of all these rough, bearded men in muddy jeans and shirts, and taking off their caps to go inside, and they see this beautiful giant baby boy, and they can be moved by it as well, and they can say like, wow, actually this is really wonderful, even if it's not a piece of gold. you know
Yeah,
these are still human beings, and people are still moved by the same basic things, and especially to see something so soft and fragile and vulnerable and pure as a baby in this time would have meant a lot to these guys who had been mostly, alone for almost months at a time. Seeing other people is a genuine pleasure, and and seeing a woman would have been, that would have been a nice little Christmas gift for them as well, even just to see a woman, even just to see a baby. And that, I think, speaks a lot to that humanity of the Old West. These were not a bunch of grizzled old men shooting each other. Some of them were, but these were human beings, and human beings are affected by the same things the world over in every century.
completely agree with you, Philip. Completely agree. And I feel as though on that note, we should end the interview here. You have anything else you'd like to say before we close?
That's pretty much it. If people listen to this before Christmas, then Merry Christmas. Spend it with your loved ones, and have a couple of drinks, and feast as much as you can. And you're sharing in even the traditions of pioneers and miners back in the Wild West. They're in the same boat with you.
All right. Thank you again, Philip.
Thank you. Pleasure.